The room was so packed with angry parents that the air felt thick like wet wool pressing against his lungs. Cameras were up. Phones were recording. The red light over the local news camera blinked like it was counting down to his execution. Item 7, the school board president said into the mic, her voice tight. Recommendation to terminate employment and refer Daniel Harper for criminal charges. On the far wall, a poster read, "Protect our kids, no more thieves." His own name was scrawled under it in black marker. Two uniformed officers waited by the exit, hands resting casually near their belts, not quite touching the cuffs he knew were meant for him. Next to them, his 9-year-old son Max sat beside their neighbor, clutching a crumpled program, eyes huge and glassy. They were about to vote. One more raised hand, one more eye, and he'd lose his job, his freedom, and probably his son. Any final comments, the president asked. Daniel swallowed. His mouth was sand. His palms were slick. $60,000 had vanished from the athletic fund, and the fake invoices all had his name on them. He knew he hadn't taken it, but the paper trail said otherwise. He pushed himself to his feet, heart pounding loud enough to drown out the whispers. Before he could speak, a voice cut across the gym. Steady, clear, female. Madam President. The woman called from the back, lifting a slim folder in one hand. I think the board needs to hear this before you destroy an innocent man's life. Daniel turned and froze. It was her. The woman from the supermarket parking lot. The one he'd helped that night in the ice storm. He'd thought he'd never see her again. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from tonight and hit that like and subscribe button if you believe courage still matters in this world. 3 months earlier, Daniel Harper's life had been a lot quieter, but no less heavy. He was 36 head of maintenance for Lincoln Ridge High School in Dayton, Ohio. Most people just called him the janitor, like the years he spent learning every pipe wire and boiler didn't count for much. His days started before dawn, in the dark chill of the boiler room with bad coffee and a wrench in his hand. He swapped light bulbs, cleared snow from the front steps, fixed leaky faucets in the girls' locker room, and unclogged toilets that teenagers thought it was funny to jam with paper towels. By afternoon, he was patching drywall or crawling through ceiling spaces while kids streamed past him like he was part of the building and not a man trying to hold his world together with duct tape and prayer. Then he'd clock out pickup Max from the neighbors and begin his second shift homework helper, burnt grilled cheese chef, Lego engineer, bedtime storyteller. He'd tuck the boy in, kiss his forehead, and then sit at the kitchen table staring at a stack of bills that didn't care how hard he worked. His ex-wife had moved to Florida with a new boyfriend and a new life, suddenly interested in stability now that Daniel was being investigated. If these accusations stuck, she'd get exactly what she wanted, full custody. He couldn't let that happen. Max was the one thing in his life that was still pure, still good. Under the flannel shirts and calloused hands, Daniel carried something most people didn't know about. Before the budget cuts, before the divorce, he'd been a paramedic. He'd spent 10 years riding in the back of an ambulance, holding strangers' hands in their worst moments, talking them through sirens and fear using skills he'd learned to keep hearts beating. To the kids at school, he was just the guy with the mop. But under that faded maintenance polo lived a man who had once fought like hell to keep people alive. That December evening, the cold hit Ohio hard. Ice glazed every railing and turned the supermarket parking lot into a glass sheet under the yellow lamps. Daniel had just loaded discount groceries into his beat-up pickup, thinking about how many ways he could stretch a pound of ground beef when he heard the sharp crack of metal on asphalt and a startled cry. He turned and saw an older woman in a navy coat, her cart sideways, a portable oxygen tank on its side, bottles rolling everywhere. Cars crept past, drivers staring, but not stopping. Daniel felt the old training click on like a switch. His hands were already moving before his brain caught up. He shut his truck door, stepped into the biting wind, and walked toward her, not knowing that this small choice on a sheet of ice would change everything. Daniel remembered the woman's startled gasp, the way her gloved hand clutched at the side of a parked sedan as her legs nearly went out from under her. He caught the cart before it slid further right at the oxygen tank and helped her steady herself on the frozen pavement. She'd insisted she was fine, embarrassed more than anything, but her breathing had worried him. He stayed until she was settled safely in her car, until her shaking stopped. She'd thanked him through fogged glass before driving off. He hadn't expected to see her again, and certainly not in a room full of people determined to ruin him. But that was 3 months earlier, long before things got ugly. After the board meeting adjourned that night, Daniel walked Max to the truck in silence. The boy held his backpack straps tight, knuckles white as snowflakes drifted down. The parking lot buzzed with small clusters of parents whispering, watching Daniel like he was leaking poison. One mother pulled her daughter closer as he passed, despite the fact that Daniel had fixed that same woman's broken garbage disposal last summer for free. Another man muttered something about crooks always having an excuse. A few teenagers from the high school kids who used to wave at him when he fixed their classroom heater snickered as they filmed him climbing into his truck. He didn't say a word. He didn't want Max to hear the rage in his voice. At home, after a quiet dinner, neither of them touched. Max finally asked the question he'd been chewing on for weeks. "Dad, did you take that money?" Daniel's chest hollowed out. "Max," he knelt. "No, I didn't. I swear to you." "I know," the boy whispered quickly, eyes wet. "I know you didn't." He wiped his cheek with the back of his hand. "But why does everybody think you did?" "Because someone powerful wants me gone," Daniel thought. "Because stories spread faster than truth. Because a janitor with calloused hands and old boots is easier to blame than a booster club president who donates 5 figures every December." But he didn't say any of that. He just pulled Max into a hug. The next morning started early, like always, but the hallways felt different, colder. Parents stood talking to the principal, their voices low but urgent. Teachers who used to greet him with a tired smile barely nodded now. It wasn't anger he felt coming off them. It was fear. Fear of being associated with him. Fear of standing next to the wrong man and having the spotlight swing their way. During lunch period, the tension snapped a little. He was mopping near the entrance to the cafeteria when Coach Stevens, a man built like a refrigerator and twice as stubborn, cornered him. "You got some nerve showing up here after what you pulled." Daniel straightened slowly, one hand still resting on the mop handle. "I didn't pull anything, Coach. That's what crooks always say." A few students nearby quieted. Their wide eyes tracked between the two men. Stevens stepped closer. "You think folks are stupid 60,000 just walks off on its own?" He jabbed a finger toward Daniel's chest. "You were the only one with key access besides me, the assistant principal and the treasurer, and I know for damn sure it wasn't us." Daniel felt heat crawling up his neck. "I know how it looks, but I didn't save it." Stevens leaned in so close Daniel could smell wintergreen gum on his breath. "If you had any decency left, you'd resign and spare that little boy of yours the embarrassment." Daniel's grip tightened on the mop handle. Then he let it go. He stepped back quiet, calm, refusing to give the coach the explosion he'd come looking for. "I'm not quitting," Daniel said softly. "Not when I'm innocent?" Stephen sneered. "We'll see." He stormed off, students scattering in his wake. That night, Max stayed quiet during dinner again. Too quiet. Halfway through reheating leftover spaghetti, Daniel noticed the boy pushing noodles around the plate without eating. "You okay, bud?" Max didn't look up. "Some kids at school said your picture was on Facebook, that it said you stole stuff." Daniel set down his fork. Hard. "What did you say to them, that they were liars?" Max's voice trembled. "And then Tommy said maybe it was true, because adults don't get yelled at that much unless they did something bad." Daniel swallowed past the burn in his throat. "Come here." He pulled Max close. "People believe things because they hear them from someone loud, not because they're true. You hear me?" Max nodded into his shirt. "But I'm gonna fix this," Daniel whispered. "I promise you." The next week brought the worst of it. The superintendent called Daniel into her office, a windowless room with an old clock that ticked too loudly. She folded her hands on her desk, wearing an expression meant to look sympathetic, but failing miserably. "Daniel," she began, "you're making this very difficult for the district. I haven't done anything. The board disagrees." He kept his jaw tight. He'd learned long ago that raising his voice only made people stop listening. "We're suspending you," she continued. "Paid leave for now. But if you don't consider resigning, this could get much uglier." For a moment, Daniel stared at the floor. He felt every ounce of exhaustion press down on him. Divorce bills, long nights patching pipes, the sick feeling of being judged by people who'd never asked him one honest question in their lives. He lifted his head. "I won't resign. Daniel. I won't say I'm guilty when I'm not." He turned and walked out, leaving the tick-tick-tick behind him. Outside the building, the winter wind slapped at his face as if trying to wake him. His phone buzzed with another call from an unknown number, probably another parent committee member telling him to do the right thing and step down. He let it ring out. But what gutted him most was when he arrived at the neighbor's house to pick up Max. Mrs. Cullen looked at him with a tight, uneasy expression. "Daniel," she said, "I think maybe it's best if I don't watch Max after school anymore. Just until this all clears up." His heart dropped. "I thought you didn't believe any of that." "I don't know what to believe," she said softly. "People are talking." He fought to keep his voice even. "Max didn't do anything. Please don't punish him." She sighed, looked torn, then shook her head. "I'm sorry." He thanked her anyway. He always tried to thank people even when they hurt him. That night, Max's questions returned like clockwork. "Do people think I'm bad too? Because you're my dad?" "No," Daniel said, sitting on the edge of his bed. "No one thinks that." But the truth was more complicated. Kids heard their parents talk. Kids repeated what they didn't understand. And Daniel had already heard whispers, little comments, half sentences about how maybe Max shouldn't be on the baseball team until things settled. How maybe he should sit out field trips this year. Pressure. It was everywhere. Squeezing tighter every day. The day everything nearly boiled over was a Thursday afternoon, gray and raw. The kind of Ohio day where the clouds looked inches from the ground. Daniel had gone back to the school to pick up the last of his tools from the maintenance shed. He was bent over his toolbox when he heard the crunch of boots behind him. He turned. It was the treasurer. A man who always smelled faintly of expensive cigars and never once lifted a folding table without calling for a student volunteer. Today, he had a tight, smug smile. "Cleaning out already?" the treasurer asked. "Smart," Saves us the trouble later. Daniel kept his voice level. Just grabbing my tools. You know, the treasurer continued edging closer. If you confess now, the board might go easier on you. Maybe even keep charges off the record for your son's sake. Daniel stared at him. I'm not confessing to something I didn't do. The treasurer scoffed. Sure. Right. The janitor with access to the storage room, the petty cash safe, the athletic office computer, totally innocent. Daniel felt a deep, slow thud in his chest. A soundless heartbeat that signaled danger long before words formed. You don't know anything, he said quietly. Please. The treasurer waved a hand. People like you always act shocked when they're caught. People like you. There it was, the line that revealed the whole truth, what they really thought of him. The treasurer stepped closer, lowering his voice to a faux confidential whisper. You're not the type we trust with money. You're barely trusted with a mop. Daniel felt something inside him crack. Not a loud break, not a scream, but something small, foundational. The kind of crack that happens when stone freezes, then thaws, then freezes again. He set down his tool bag slowly. I've worked here 10 years, he said, voice steady as bedrock. And I've never once taken a cent that wasn't mine. That's what every thief says right before the cuffs go on. Daniel stepped forward. The treasurer stumbled back. I'm not a thief, Daniel repeated quietly. Just then a shout echoed from the parking lot. Dad Max's voice. Hi, scared. Daniel's stomach dropped. He rushed past the treasurer and out of the shed. Max stood by the truck backpack on the ground, wiping at his eyes. A group of older students had circled him, mocking, laughing. One boy held up his phone. Smile for the camera, the kid jeered. We're gonna send this to the whole school, son of the school thief. Daniel's vision tunneled. The air went cold and sharp in his lungs. He stepped in fast, placing his body between the teens and his son. That's enough, he said, low, firm, dangerous in its calm. The boys froze, startled by something in his eyes. They scattered, muttering, glancing back uneasily. Daniel crouched beside Max. Are you hurt? No, Max whispered. They just said stuff. He looked up, face blotchy with tears. Is it ever gonna stop? Daniel swallowed hard. Because he didn't know. Because everything around him felt like it was tightening, neighbors turning their backs, parents breathing down his neck, administrators whispering behind closed doors. Because he could feel something building. Something he couldn't name. A storm worth of pressure closing in. The treasurer stepped out of the shed, then dusting his hands, smirking like he'd just watched a circus act. See, Daniel, he called out lightly. This is why we need to wrap this up quickly, for the boy's sake. Daniel didn't answer. He was too busy holding Max close, shielding him against the wind, the whispers, the cruelty. But as he lifted his son into the truck and slammed the door, one thought burned hotter than anything he'd felt yet. This was heading toward a breaking point. And when it came, someone in this town would learn exactly how dangerous it was to push a good man too far. The storm wasn't close anymore. It was here. The next 2 days crawled by thick with tension. Word spread fast about the scene in the parking lot, kids cornering Max, the treasurer, standing by and smirking like he was watching a street performance instead of a scared 9-year-old. Some parents were furious that Daniel had intimidated students, twisting the story until he sounded like the threat. Others whispered that maybe the treasurer had gone too far. But the loud voices drowned out the reasonable ones, as they always seemed to. By Monday morning, the school board announced an emergency hearing. A vote to remove Daniel permanently. A vote to turn over his file to the county prosecutor. Everyone knew what that meant. He'd be arrested. Charged. Max would be uprooted from everything stable in his life. The hearing was scheduled for that night in the high school gym. All day, Daniel moved like a man underwater slow-focused, carrying a pressure that made every breath heavy. He packed his toolbox, polished his boots, even though they were scuffed beyond saving, and helped Max with his homework, as if the world wasn't burning at their doorstep. But by late afternoon, a winter storm rolled in faster than anyone expected. The kind that hits Ohio with sideways sleet and winds that howl against the windows like something alive. Still, the meeting wasn't canceled. Of course it wasn't. Not when the board was so eager to tie him to the stake. "Do we have to go?" Max asked, as Daniel buttoned his coat. "Yeah, bud. But you're not sitting with the crowd. You'll stay with Mrs. Cullen tonight." Max hesitated. What if they yell at you again?" Daniel forced a small smile. "Then I'll be fine. You just worry about being brave." But Max wasn't convinced. Kids always know when something's wrong, even when we lie to protect them. On the drive to Mrs. Cullen's house, visibility dropped to almost nothing. Daniel leaned forward in the seat, squinting through the curtains of white that hammered the windshield. Every instinct from his paramedic years kicked in: scan the road, watch the tail lights ahead, keep speed steady on ice. He dropped Max off, hugged him tight, then stepped back into the freezing night. The wind slammed the door out of his hands, as if the storm itself had an opinion about the night unfolding. By the time he reached the school, the parking lot was a disaster. Sleet piled over everything. Several cars sat crooked or sideways, trapped in the icy mess. An ambulance was already parked near the entrance, not for him, thankfully, but for someone who'd slipped trying to reach the stairs. Parents clustered near the doors, wrapped in scarves and tension. The storm made everything feel sharper, louder, more desperate. Inside the gym buzzed with agitation. Folding chairs were set in tight rows, most of them full. News reporters hovered near the walls. Teachers spoke in stiff, worried tones. Board members sat at the long front table, papers arranged like weapons. But Daniel barely noticed any of it, because as he stepped inside, the treasurer spotted him and smirked like this night was a victory parade. "Look who came," the treasurer said loudly enough for several parents to hear. "The star of the show." Daniel ignored him. He headed toward the back of the room where his public defender waited. The man's expression was apologetic, but grim. "They want your head," he murmured. "No point dressing it up." "I figured," Daniel said softly. "We'll do what we can." Daniel nodded. He wasn't expecting miracles. He took a seat behind his lawyer, folded his hands, and stared at the scuffed gym floor. The meeting opened with formalities, roll call, agenda approval, a brief update about the storm. But when the board president tapped her microphone, the entire room quieted. "Item 7, she said. Recommendation to terminate employment and refer Daniel Harper for criminal charges." Phones lifted, cameras clicked, murmurs rippled through the room. The president looked down the table. "We'll begin with evidence review." The treasurer rose with self-importance dripping off him. He carried a thick binder and a little flash drive, as if he had brought the Holy Scriptures. But as he approached the projector cart, something went wrong. Very wrong. The lights flickered. A deep rumble shook the gym floor. Several parents gasped. "What was that?" someone shouted. Then the fire alarm shrieked. Red strobes flashed on the walls. The PA crackled with panic. Attention, sprinkler malfunction in the East Wing. All attendees moved toward the designated fire exit. Before it could finish, a loud cracking sound echoed from above. A metal support bar groaned under the strain of ice on the roof. Then another crack. Then a sharp, terrible snap. A section of the gym's lighting rig, heavy steel beams, thick wiring and glass housings lurched sideways. It swayed violently over the bleachers right above the cluster of parents and children trying to reach the exit. Someone screamed. The entire rig tilted. And then it fell. Not a slow collapse, an avalanche of metal and glass breaking free, dropping fast toward a crowd that didn't have time to react. Daniel moved before thought caught up. The old training hit him like a lightning bolt. The years in the ambulance, the calls where seconds meant lives. The voice of his old captain, evaluate, move, commit. He sprinted across the gym, slipping once on melting sleet tracked in from the hallway, but catching himself against a row of chairs. Parents scattered, stumbling, slipping. A mother fell. A teenage boy froze in terror. Two younger kids pressed themselves against the bleachers, screaming for someone, anyone to grab them. But they were directly beneath the falling rig. Everyone else was running away. Daniel ran toward it. He lunged, grabbed the two children by their jackets and swung them hard toward open space. One tumbled across the bleacher steps. The other slid across the floor, shocked, but alive. Then the rig crashed. The explosion of sound was violent metal slamming into wood glass, shattering wires, hissing. The force knocked Daniel sideways. He hit the floor hard on his shoulder, but rolled instinctively, protecting his head. Sparks spit from torn wiring. Smoke wafted from a cracked control box. The fire alarm blared in strobe-lit chaos. But someone was still trapped. A woman's voice, muffled, shaky. "Help my leg!" Daniel pushed to his feet, ignoring the stabbing pain in his shoulder. The rig had pinned a section of bleachers, trapping a middle-aged teacher beneath twisted beams. Blood soaked the side of her pant leg, where the metal had torn deep. Parents screamed. Board members looked around helplessly. The treasurer backed away, pale as paper. No, someone else. Somebody else, do something." No one moved. Daniel did. He dropped beside the woman, assessed her leg in seconds. Bone intact, muscle torn, bleeding heavy but manageable. He tore off his own flannel shirt sleeve, folded it into a pressure pad, and tied it tight with a section of stray cable. "It's okay," he said, calm, steady. "I've got you. You can't lift that, you'll get crushed." Daniel planted both feet, braced his back against the bent bleacher frame, and wrapped his hands around the lowest part of the rig. "I'm not lifting the whole thing," he said. "Just enough." Adrenaline surged through him, a deep primal strength he'd forgotten he had. The metal groaned, his muscles screamed, the cut in his sleeve soaked through where the beam tore at his arm. But the rig shifted. Not much. Just enough. Two men rushed in once they saw it move Coach Stevens and another dad from the football team. Together they dragged the trapped teacher out from beneath the beam. The moment she cleared the danger, Daniel let go. The rig slammed back down. The gym shook again. But no one was hurt this time. For a moment, in the chaos of alarms, smoke, and frantic voices, everything froze. People stared at Daniel. Not like he was trash. Not like he was a thief. Not like he was a problem to be erased. They stared like they were seeing him for the first time. The board president approached, breathless. "My God. Daniel, you just..." He didn't stay to hear the rest. He was already checking the injured teacher's pulse, her breathing, her leg, his voice low and professional. She looked up at him through tears. You used to do this, didn't you?" He nodded once. "A long time ago." Coach Stevens stepped forward, stunned. "Harper, you saved 3 kids." Daniel didn't answer. He was too focused on slowing the bleeding, too deep in instinct. Then, an unfamiliar but steady female voice rose from the doorway. "Clear a path. I need to get through." Heads turned. A woman in a navy coat stepped inside, pushing past the bewildered crowd. Snowflakes clung to her hair. Her breath fogged in the cold draft from the open doors. And in her hand, she carried a slim folder, the same one she'd tried to present at the start of the meeting. The woman from the parking lot. Only now her presence felt different. Calm, commanding, composed under pressure. She knelt beside Daniel, her eyes widening as she took in the scene. "You stabilized her leg?" she said quietly. "Perfectly." Daniel blinked at her. "What are you doing here?" Before she could answer, the treasurer stumbled forward. You can't be here. This is a closed meeting." The woman rose slowly, turning to face him. "I'm very aware of what this meeting is," she said, "and I brought something the board needs to see." Her voice carried across the gym. Strong, clear, unshaken. The treasurer flinched, because suddenly the power dynamic in the room had shifted. Dramatically. Everyone had just watched Daniel risk his life to save strangers. Everyone had watched the treasurer shrink backward in fear. And now a stranger, one who clearly wasn't some random bystander, had walked into the storm with evidence in hand. Daniel looked up at her, breathing hard. The children he'd saved were clutching their parents. The crowd had fallen silent, and the woman's eyes met his with a steady recognition. Something big was coming. The moment he'd been waiting for without even knowing it was finally here. For a few long seconds, no one moved. The alarms screamed. Red lights blinked in jagged rhythm across the wrecked gym. The fallen lighting rig hissed as wires sparked against torn metal. But all Daniel heard was the thin, shaky breaths of the teacher he'd just pulled from beneath the beam. Someone whispered, "He saved us." Another, "My God, he shouldn't even be here tonight." Then the board president exhaled in a trembling rush, as if she'd been holding her breath since the collapse. "Everyone please step back and clear a space." Parents obeyed instantly. Fear and awe had a way of quieting a room faster than any gavel. Teachers helped usher families toward the far wall. Even the reporters looked shaken, cameras lowered for once. Daniel pushed to his feet, ignoring the sting in his shoulder. His shirt was soaked, his palms cut, his breath fogging in the cold draft, sweeping through the open exit doors. The navy-coated woman, pale from the shock of watching an entire rig fall, turned from the treasurer and returned her gaze to Daniel. "You all saw," the board president said. He acted fast. "We could have lost people tonight." Coach Stevens cleared his throat. Loudly. "Lost people. We'd be zipping them into bags if he hadn't moved." A murmur of agreement rolled through the crowd. The treasurer looked like someone had slapped him. He straightened his tie with trembling fingers, searching desperately for a foothold, any foothold in the shifting attention. Let's stay focused," he stammered. "One heroic moment doesn't erase his involvement in the missing funds." A chorus of angry shouts cut him off. "Show some respect. Kids were under that thing. You ran the other way." Daniel didn't say anything, not a word. He was already kneeling again, checking the teacher's pulse, as the EMTs hurried over from the entrance. The woman in the navy coat stepped forward, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "With your permission," she said to the EMTs, "I'd like to give a brief statement before you take her out." They paused, taking in her badge clipped under the coat. Their eyes widened. "Of course, Agent Cole." Daniel blinked. "Agent..." The treasurer's mouth dropped open. You never said you were federal. I never said I wasn't," she replied, calm and cold. Agent Cole turned back toward Daniel. "Your field assessment was correct. The bleeding's controlled. Vitals are stable." She lowered her voice. "You knew exactly what you were doing." He shrugged slightly, almost embarrassed. "Old habits." What kind of habits? The board president asked, stepping closer. Agent Cole met Daniel's eyes, seeking permission. He gave a single nod. She faced the crowd. He didn't tell you, she said, but he was a paramedic for 10 years, decorated twice, commendations for bravery, responded to some of the worst highway pileups in Montgomery County's history, the kind of cases most people can't even read about. People gasped. Dozens of heads swiveled back toward Daniel. He walked away from the job after an ambulance rollover during an ice storm, Cole continued, one that killed one of his partners and left him with permanent shoulder damage. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. He'd never planned to revisit that night, certainly not here, not in front of a gym full of people who'd labeled him a thief. Agent Cole softened her tone. Paramedics don't get paid to be heroes. They do it because something inside them refuses to let people die. And tonight she gestured at the wreckage. His instincts saved 3 children and a teacher. A woman in the front row covered her mouth, tears welling. A father clutched his son tighter. Coach Stevens looked as if someone had punched him in the gut. The treasurer, however, sputtered like a man drowning. This isn't relevant. He still stole. No. Agent Cole cut in sharply. He didn't. She lifted the slim folder she'd been holding since she entered the gym. These, she said, are internal audit records from the county's grant oversight office. The athletic fund you claim he embezzled from was being watched due to earlier reporting inconsistencies. She glanced at Daniel. I tried to deliver these before the collapse, but circumstances intervened. The treasurer's face went gray. Agent Cole opened the folder and held up a printed page. Every irregular invoice, every altered authorization, every missing transfer record, all of them were traced back to a single individual. Her finger tapped the name on the page. The treasurer's. A stunned silence swept across the gym. He opened a parallel account under the table. Cole continued, used existing vendor names to mask transfers, then created staged withdrawals to pin blame on the employee with the lowest procedural oversight. The air changed. A heavy electric shift. People who had glared at Daniel for weeks now stared at the treasurer with open disgust. Parents who'd whispered rumors began whispering apologies. Teachers who had avoided him now edged closer, guilt etched into their faces. Stevens stepped forward, voice low with fury. You did all that and tried to ruin him. The treasurer stammered. You can't trust her. She has no authority here. Agent Cole calmly pulled out a second ID. A federal one. I have full authority. And you... She looked at him like she was examining something rotten or under formal investigation. The treasurer backed away, bumping into a stack of chairs. This is outrageous. You don't understand how things work. His words were swallowed by the storm outside and the rising murmurs inside. The board president turned to Daniel, her voice trembling. All this time, you were innocent. Daniel didn't speak. He was still kneeling beside the injured teacher as the EMTs prepared the stretcher. His hands stayed steady, every motion precise. Careful. He looked tired and hurt, and something deeper, some mixture of relief and sorrow, crossed his eyes, as if not even vindication could erase the weeks of humiliation. Agent Cole touched his shoulder lightly. You okay? He nodded once. You saved lives tonight, she said quietly, and you saved yourself even before the truth came out. When the EMTs wheeled the teacher away, the entire gym broke into applause. Not polite, not forced. A surge of raw gratitude, a wave of realization. Daniel slowly stood. People approached him hesitantly, at first, parents, teachers, even a few board members. Apologies spilled out, some awkward, some emotional. I'm so sorry. I misjudged you. We should have known. Thank you for saving my son." Daniel accepted each apology with a quiet nod, though he didn't have many words to give. He wasn't used to being seen. Not like this. Coach Stevens stepped up last, removing his cap with trembling hands. "I was wrong," he said, voice cracking. "About everything. You're a better man than any of us deserved." Daniel looked at him at the man who'd cornered and belittled him in the cafeteria, and finally said, "Just make sure you treat the next guy better." Stevens nodded, eyes wet. Agent Cole lifted the folder again. "There's something else the board needs to know." She addressed the front table. "Your system failures made this possible. If you'd conducted proper reviews, if you'd verified the signatures, if you'd listened, instead of assuming this man wouldn't have been dragged through 3 months of hell." The board president looked stricken. What happens now?" "That depends on him," Cole said, turning back to Daniel. Every eye followed. In that moment, the entire room felt like it leaned toward him, not accusing, not condemning, but waiting. Cole spoke gently. "The County Oversight Office is prepared to officially clear you. But even beyond that, there's a role open. A Community Emergency Response Coordinator. Full benefits, advanced field responsibility. You'd be perfect for it." Daniel stared at her, stunned. The room murmured. A job. A real job. Not a mop. Not a broken pipe. Not a basement office with flickering lights. A job that recognized what he was truly capable of. Cole added, "We could use someone with your instincts. And your heart." He looked past her across the gym, the fallen rig, the shaken parents, the children he'd pulled from harm. He thought of Max sitting across from him at their kitchen table, asking if things would ever get better. His throat tightened. Before he could answer, the board president stepped forward. "Daniel," she said softly, "we owe you more than an apology. We owe you your dignity back. And your job if you want it." The room fell silent again. Daniel exhaled slowly, the breath shaking out of him, like a man finally setting down a weight he'd been carrying too long. Tonight had changed everything. The truth had come out. The power had shifted. And now he had a decision to make, one that would define his future. He looked at Agent Cole. "What exactly," he asked quietly, "does that coordinator job involve?" She smiled, small but full of promise. That she said is what we'll talk about next. And with the storm still raging outside the gym, lights flickering above, and the crowd waiting for his answer, Daniel stepped toward the path he never expected to see again, a path that wasn't defined by accusations or shame, but by purpose. The storm finally eased as the last emergency vehicles pulled away from the school. The gym, once filled with suspicion and pointed fingers, had fallen into a strange hush. The treasurer was escorted out the side doors by 2 officers, his shoulders hunched, his earlier arrogance drained away. Parents turned their faces from him, unable to look at the man they'd trusted, unwilling to admit how easily they had believed the worst about someone else. Daniel stood near the exit, his arm bandaged where the metal beam had cut him. People approached him one by one, some in tears, some embarrassed, some unable to form full sentences. They kept thanking him. "Thank you for saving my boy. Thank you for saving my daughter. Thank you for being braver than the rest of us." He nodded, accepting each apology quietly, not out of pride, but because the exhaustion in his bones left him no room for anger. The board president reached him last, her voice low and earnest. "We failed you," she said. "I failed you. Whatever you choose next, your job here or something new, you'll have our full support." That humility alone would have shocked him a week ago. Agent Cole waited near the double doors, watching him with a small, knowing smile. She didn't crowd him. She didn't speak for him. She simply stood there until their eyes met, then offered a nod of respect, one professional to another. When Daniel stepped out into the cold, the night air hit him like a baptism. Clean, raw, honest. He hadn't felt anything like it in years. His first stop was Mrs. Cullen's house. Max barreled out onto the porch before Daniel could even take 2 steps. "Dad, are you okay? I saw fire trucks." "Mrs. Cullen said you were on the news. Did something fall?" Daniel scooped him up tight, holding the boy's shivering frame against his chest. "I'm okay," he murmured. "Everything's okay." Max pulled back, studying his father's face with that sharp, earnest intensity only a frightened child can have. "Did they believe you now?" Daniel kissed the top of his head. "Yeah, buddy. They believe me now." The next morning, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, board members, teachers, even a couple of the parents who had shouted the loudest in earlier meetings. He let most calls go to voicemail, choosing instead to sit with Max on the couch, the two of them wrapped together in a blanket with a cartoon playing quietly in the background. By afternoon, Agent Cole stopped by. Not in her navy coat, not in her stern professional posture, just a woman in jeans and a warm fleece jacket, respectful enough to leave her badge in the car. "I wanted to check on you," she said, "and to say thank you." "For what?" Daniel asked, genuinely puzzled. "For proving me right," she answered softly. "Some people stand tall because the world treated them kindly. Others stand tall in spite of it." She met his eyes. "You're the second kind." She left him with a card, her personal number, and a line written in clean, simple handwriting. "Let's discuss the coordinator role whenever you're ready." 3 months later, winter had slipped into a tender Midwest spring. The Emergency Response Office offered Daniel the role formally, and he accepted it. The job pulled from every part of his past paramedic instinct, building knowledge crisis management, and gave him something he hadn't felt in years: purpose. His days took on a steady rhythm. Morning briefings, training new volunteers, coordinating drills with local fire departments, visiting schools to teach kids basic first aid. He found he was good at it, really good. And people began turning to him not out of suspicion, but because they trusted him instinctively fully, without hesitation. The school too had changed. Security upgrades, transparency requirements, a new treasurer chosen through a public process, and a standing invitation for Daniel to consult whenever he wished. When he walked through the halls now, students waved. Teachers greeted him warmly. Parents nodded in gratitude. Stevens clapped him on the shoulder every time he saw him. His old bluster softened into something closer to respect. But the biggest change wasn't at the school. It was at home. Max was thriving. His smile came quicker. His shoulders sat lighter. He no longer asked hard questions about the future. He no longer watched Daniel from the doorway at night, worried he might vanish. One evening after a long shift at the response center, Daniel and Max sat at their small kitchen table, eating spaghetti, the same dish they once pushed around their plates in silence. This time Max talked animatedly about baseball, about school projects, about how he wanted to be a helper, like Dad. And for the first time in a long time, Daniel didn't feel like a man patching holes in a sinking life. He felt like someone building something new. In early summer, a community recognition ceremony was held downtown. Nothing fancy, just folding chairs, a small stage, and a microphone that squeaked too often. They called Daniel's name last. He stepped up uncomfortable, but smiling anyway, as neighbors, teachers, parents, and even a few students cheered. Agent Cole stood at the back, arms crossed, watching with a quiet pride that didn't need to be spoken. Max squeezed his father around the waist. "You're famous," he whispered. Daniel laughed softly. "No, I'm just seen. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything." As the ceremony ended and people filed out into the warm June air, Daniel paused at the edge of the crowd. The sun dipped low behind the old courthouse, painting the sky in gold and rose. Max ran ahead on the sidewalk, swinging his arms free and weightless. Agent Cole stepped beside Daniel. "You've done well," she said simply. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," she replied. "You did what the right kind of person does, and that's rarer than it should be." Daniel watched Max chase fireflies through the grass, his laughter ringing bright and unbroken. "Funny," Daniel murmured, "how the worst months of my life ended up leading to the best ones." "That's usually how the truth comes out," Cole said. "In storms." He nodded. He'd learned that firsthand. Because sometimes life tries hard to break a man. Sometimes it pushes him to the edge of losing everything: his dignity, his livelihood, his child. And sometimes just when it seems the world isn't watching, a single act of courage reveals who he really is. And the world finally sees it too. That's the heart of it, the part worth remembering. A good man can be knocked down. He can be overlooked. He can be underestimated, lied about, pushed aside. But if he stands up when it counts, if he holds fast to the kind of integrity that doesn't bend in the wind, the world will change around him. Maybe slowly, maybe painfully, but it will. And that's the thing older folks always understood better than most. Courage isn't loud. It isn't showy. It's a quiet choice made in a moment when no one expects it, and it's the power that turns storms into second chances.